Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome back to our Garry Kasparov series. So in this series, we're following Garry Kasparov's life and his chess career, and we're back now in the 1986 World Chess Championship between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov. It's now a different match game because it's now Anatoly Karpov that's the challenger, of course, and Garry Kasparov is now the world champion in chess. The World Championship match in 1984 and 1985 was, I think, very wild event. The match game was prolonged for 6 months because of this Fischer rule. The Fischer rule said that the winner of the World Championship is the first player that gets 6 wins, which was really incredible. Many draws have been played, and then the rules have changed. Then they went back to this 24 match games, where of course the winner would be Anatoly Karpov if the match game would have ended in a draw, because Anatoly Karpov in the year 1985 had the draw odds. Now it was Garry Kasparov that had draw odds. So it means now that Anatoly Karpov has now to win the match game if he wants now to get back his World Championship title. So we're starting now this very wild match game with the game 4. The first 3 games ended in a draw, and now in the game 4, Anatoly Karpov played with the black pieces and Garry Kasparov played with the white piece. So let's check out now what happened. Kasparov opens now with the move d4. Here Karpov plays knight to f6. We have c4, and after e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4, we have the Nimzo Indian on the board. The Nimzo Indian is of course a very often and popular play now even these days, because the main positional threat is of course the move bishop takes c3, then b takes c3 is happening, and then of course white has this messed up pawn structure, this double pawn structure on the c file, but at least white is continuing then with the great bishop pair. So here in the continuation, Kasparov plays now a very pragmatic idea, and he played now very often this move, knight to f3. He played very often this 3 knights variation of the Nimzo Indian. Many times you see players doing something like this, a3 or queen to b3, but Garry Kasparov felt, I think, very comfortable in this 3 knights variation. He played this ideas very often against the Nimzo Indian. After move knight to f3, here Karpov breaks the position in the center immediately with the move c5, and here we have the Fianchetto variation by Garry Kasparov with the move g3. We have c takes d4, we have knight to d4, and now Karpov is castling. It's a very pragmatic idea again, because we are securing first our king, because what we want to do is now to play the move d5 and break and open here the center, because white is still 2 more moves far away from fully development, because you still have to play bishop to g2 and then maybe kingside castling in order to secure the king. Meanwhile, black is of course doing something. Black is at least breaking the center immediately. So after move castling here, bishop to g2, of course, played by Garry Kasparov, and now comes this idea d5. But there is a great, this is, I think, something great here for white, because with the move d5, actually what is going on here now, we can undouble our potential double pawn structure. If now, let's see, queen to b3 happened, like Garry Kasparov played, we have now bishop takes c3, and now after b takes c3, with the move d5, black gave here, I think, white the opportunity to double himself, because many times in the Nimzo Indian, you see that white is simply continuing the game with the double pawn structure. We have said in the beginning that white is continuing again the game with the very active bishop pair, but has the weakness of the double pawn structure on the c file. But now when black is playing the move d5, you see it's always a great opportunity for white to undouble the pawn structure. That's, I think, something that white loves when black is playing the move d5. Now, okay, after potential c takes d5, white will undouble himself, but at least black has some kind of a new strategical element. It's of course the isolated pawn on c3. So if you could just imagine now the position, c takes d5, okay, white has undoubled the pawn structure, but is then continuing the game with an isolated pawn on c3. So still there are some weaknesses also in white's position. Then black can maybe attack further in the continuation of the game. So after move b takes c3, here knight to c6 played by Anatoly Karpov. What black would love to do and would love to see now in the continuation of the game is this move, knight takes c6, maybe b takes c6, and now after something like c takes d5, okay, here c takes d5 could happen. Again, white has the bishop pair, but I like simply more black's position now, because again, I'm pointing out this isolated pawn is simply a long-term weakness in the continuation of the game. So that's why I think from this point on, black has a comfortable game. So that's why knight to c6 is here not an option in the continuation of the game. Kasparov Kasparov plays simply this idea, c takes d5. Now Karpov plays knight to a5, first attacking the queen, queen to c2, and now knight takes d5. It's a more accurate way to proceed here, because if you play e takes d5, the problem is now again this isolated pawn. You should always watch the structures in the continuation of the game. You should always watch the structures in the middle game, because isolated pawn, backwards pawns, weak squares, these are the main attacking possibilities for your opponent. When you get some isolated pawns, backward pawns, I don't know, hanging pawns on similar ideas, then these pawns will get attacked in the continuation of the game. So you see, if you recapture with the pawn, then bishop to g5 will happen. You see now the bishop is attacking the knight is protecting the pawn. So if after potential bishop takes g5, queen bishop takes f6, and here queen to f6, then of course the pawn on d5 could be hanging. So if it recapture with the pawn here, then of course you get a messed up pawn structure in front of the king. So that's why you have to be careful always what's going on in the middle of in the middle game stage, what's going on with your pawns. After the move here c takes d5, here knight to d5 was played by Anatoly Karpov, and now queen to d3. e4 seems like a dangerous idea, but actually it's not such a great idea here for white. After e4, I think knight to b6 is happening here, and the problem is now black will create a very powerful blockade here around the square c4. Let's see possible continuation. Maybe white could attack the rook with the move bishop to a3, but now rook to e8, and now after castling, knight to c4 is happening. And I think from this point on, again, black is very solid here. Black has this very powerful blockade. Whenever you face your opponent's isolated pawn, the best way is simply to create first the blockade against his isolated pawn. And now I think after bishop to d7 and rook to c8, I think black could find also great ways to attack simply this isolated pawn. Still, of course, the bishop on a3 is hanging, so first, of course, white has also to react here. White has to remove the bishop somewhere in the continuation of the game. So that's why this e4 idea, you see, sometimes in chess we think that an aggressive move is the best move, but actually it's not. e4 is not bringing anything here white. So therefore move queen to c2, here knight to d5, as said, queen to d3 was played by Garry Kasparov. Now he's preparing here also the move c4 to kick away the knight from the center, but staying of course with this open long diagonal, because with the move e4 you're locking also of course a little bit your light square bishop here. So after move queen to d3, we have bishop to d7, which wasn't again the best of moves by Karpov. Karpov should have proceeded simply with this idea knight to b6. As we said, the main idea is here simply the blockade around the square c4. That's the basic goal here for black. Bishop to d7 is a little bit too slow, because now after move c4 the knight gets challenged, and again knight to e7 was played by Karpov. Again, probably the best way is simply to play the move knight to b6. That was the only maneuver here for Karpov. If of course now c5 happens, it's not a problem. I think we can play simply knight to c4, continue our blockade idea here on the queen side. Then of course we can try some rook to c8 ideas, again simply attacking this long-term weakness, this isolated pawn on c5. But okay, after move here c4, here knight to e7 was played by Karpov, and now castling by Kasparov, and now rook to c8 attacking the pawn on c4. But here Kasparov found a great way how to counterplay these ideas, because c4 is of course a long-term weakness. It's not the point that we want protected here. Kasparov played a great counterattack against this pawn on b7. If you try now b6, it's of course not good, because you get simply knight takes a5, b takes a5, and now after move bishop to a3. The problem is now when you have played this knight on e7, as we said in the beginning, knight to b6 was much better. Here now the knight is pinned through the whole game. You have to first of course remove the rook here from this long diagonal, but now I think rook to d1 will happen. You see rook to c1 is happening here. It's an pass pawn on the c file with the support of the bishops. Again, I think black is strategically and tactically lost. So here we will rewild stuff what can happen if you make a slight inaccuracy in these types of structures. So here after move let's go back. Here knight to b3 was played by Garry Kasparov. Here Karpov takes now the pawn on c4, but Kasparov has now also the opportunity to take the pawn on b7. In the continuation we have rook to c7 attacking the bishop, and now bishop to a6 attacking the knight, knight to e5, queen to e3 again, knight to c4. We have now queen to e4, attacking again the knight, and now after knight to d6 here, queen to d3, played by Garry Kasparov, which is, I think, a great idea. You see now many pieces are a little bit loose on the board. I think we can notice that the knight on d6 is not good. The knight on e7 is also not good because this bishop will come into the game through the square a3, and now comes, I think, one of the critical moments of this game. Here, Karpov plays now the move rook to c6. A better idea is simply bishop to c6, protecting this knight like this, because if you try now bishop to a3, the problem is, I think now we can play here the move bishop to d5. We can create again a blockade because e4 is not a possibility, or at least I think white could of course have this very active bishop, and white could maybe break with f3 e4, but this is long-term plan. Meanwhile, black is doing, of course, something, but in the continuation of the game, rook to c6 is, I think, again giving some opportunities here for Kasparov to attack, because he simply proceeded with his normal idea, bishop to a3. We have now bishop to c8, and now it's actually Kasparov that's not reacting correctly. He played here the move bishop to c8. A better idea is simply to play bishop to b5, simply attacking the rook further. If now knight takes b5 happens, then queen to b5, and you see now, first of all, we can notice again the knight is hanging. If you try now, for instance, rook to b6 to attack the queen, then queen to c5 is, I think, winning the game immediately. If you try maybe knight to g6 to protect your rook, here it's not the problem. We can simply attack the queen further with the move rook to d1, and I think again black is in serious trouble. Or we can play rook from f to d1 or rook from a to d1. Knight to d4 will happen, so again we can also try some ideas of h4, h5. The knight is a little bit loose on the board, so really wild stuff here for white and for black. As said, here Kasparov took bishop takes c8. The better idea, as we said, bishop to b5, simply getting use of this long diagonal of the dark square bishop. But okay, here after bishop to c8, we have knight takes c8, we have rook to d1, and here Karpov simplifies the game with the move rook to d3, queen takes d3, we have rook to d3, and now rook to e8, we have rook to d1. At least Kasparov has accomplished now that he won the battle on the d5. That's I think a great file to attack. Now also threats are rook to d7, getting the rook on the 7th rank. Whenever you have the opportunity to get your rook on your opponent's 7th rank, or from black's perspective, of course, on the 2nd rank, you should do it, because then, of course, many pawns are on the 7th rank. You can simply attack them further. So in the continuation, we have f6 here by Karpov. We have now knight to d4, attacking the rook. We have rook to b6, and now bishop to c5. Here Kasparov is simply kicking away the rook further. We have rook to a6, and now knight to b5. This is a great move by Garry Kasparov. You cannot take here the pawn on a2. That's the main issue, because you get simply knight to c7. First, the attack against the rook. There's only one good square for the rook to f8, but then you get knight to e6. Again, you have only one square here for the rook to e8. Again, knight to c7 after rook to f8. Now you see this is the serious threat, rook to e3. This knight is trapped here. The knight is pinned by the bishop. You can maybe protect it, but here rook to d8 is happening, and again it's simply a lost game. So really wild stuff what Garry Kasparov has prepared here. So it was a tricky move, this move knight to b5. You see rook takes a2 is not a possibility. In the continuation of the game, we have rook to c6. Maybe a slightly better idea is simply to play knight to d5, creating sort of a blockade, trying to lock here the d file, but still with e4, I think in the continuation of the game, white could break the position, white could kick away this very annoying knight from the center. So here, after move knight to b5, rook to c6 was played by Karpov. We have bishop takes e7, we have knight to e7, and finally this rook comes on the 7th rank. We have knight to g6, and now Kasparov grabs a very important pawn. Not that Garry Kasparov has grabbed also one pawn. The problem is, I think it's now this distant pass pawn, and the knight doesn't love to compete against the distant pass pawn, because the knight has some trouble to attack this pawn. If this pawn would be maybe somewhere in the center of the board, then it could be much easier to attack this pawn. But when the pawn is on the edge of the board, it's really a long-term weakness and long-term problem here for black. So after move rook to a7, we have knight to f8, we have a4, we have rook to b8 attacking the knight, we have e3, h5, we have king to g2, e5 here by Karpov. We have rook to d3, king to h7, and now a very nice idea here by Kasparov, rook to c3, trying to simplify the game. We have an extra pawn. A simplification idea is, I think, a very important idea here also for white. Rook takes rook to c8 was played. Now rook takes c6, rook takes c6, and now Garry Kasparov is trying to centralize first his knight, then also to push the pawn further here on the a file. So knight to a6, we have knight to d5, king to h6, and now Kasparov is simply pushing the pawn further. We have e4, and now after a6 in this position, Karpov actually resigns. So what could happen? You could maybe try here to move knight to c5, attacking the pawn, but then you get simply rook to c7, and you have to now trade off the pieces. Rook to c7, knight to c7, and there's no way to stop anymore this pass pawn on the a file. So really wild stuff. So after move a6, as I said, here in this position, Karpov resigned. So okay, really wild game. I think Kasparov outplayed here Karpov really positionally in this Nimzo Indian structures. We saw that with the move knight to b6, knight to c4, maybe Karpov could find a more pragmatic way to go into the mid game, a more static game, then maybe to paralyze a little bit white's bishop further. Kasparov cut his chance, took his chance, won the game in the game 4. No, so again, I think it was a very important and tough moment now for Anatoly Karpov, because we said in the beginning that Kasparov had raw odds, so it means that Karpov has to win the match game. So it's not only about draws. If the game ends in a 12-12 draw, then of course Garry Kasparov stays the world champion in chess. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas in the Nimzo Indian defense. If you want to see more Garry Kasparov's games, check out my whole series, The Path to Glory by Garry Kasparov. Here's the link of our playlist. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.